Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're doing something a little different. Instead of tracking a specific historical figure or a massive, sweeping empire, we are tracking a 5,600-year-old idea. An idea that literally allows us to communicate across the immense gulf of space and time. We're talking about the history of writing and how it all started by solving some very everyday practical problems in ancient Sumer. Okay, let's dive into this. To really understand how this monumental shift happened, I need you to travel back with me to ancient Sumer. This is where the world's very first real cities popped up, and where the widespread use of writing was actually born. And it wasn't born out of some grand philosophical desire to record history. Nope, it was born out of stark, absolute necessity. And the center of that necessity? The temple. Just picture the scene for a second. You're standing in this ancient, dusty landscape. Down on the ground, it's absolute chaos. You've got potters working wet clay, merchants aggressively haggling in the streets, houses, gardens, the whole shebang. But looming over all of it, casting these giant cinematic shadows across the entire city, are these massive, sun-drenched temples. And these towering structures play a ridiculously huge part in why human beings ever started writing things down in the first place. To really wrap our heads around this, we have to look at the sheer scale of these places. We aren't talking about a couple of loose villages with a few hundred people here. These were full-blown city-states, united by their shared gods and a total mastery of irrigation. We're talking tens of thousands of people packed together. And as those populations absolutely surged, those towering temples just got bigger and bigger. But here is the secret about these sprawling temple complexes. They weren't just places to go and worship. They were the economic engines of the entire city-state. Think of them like giant warehouses, pooling the vast wealth of the city. In good times, absolute floods of grain and donations would pour into the temples. And in lean times, they'd distribute those goods back out to literally keep people from starving. It made the priests incredibly wealthy, for sure, but pooling resources like this was absolutely crucial just to keep a city of this massive scale functioning. So imagine tons and tons of supplies moving in and out of those temple doors every single day. This is where we meet our protagonist, the ancient temple accountant. Picture this guy standing there, watching laborers carry in hundreds of heavy clay pitchers full of grain. Every time a jar comes in, he takes a little tool and makes a simple tally mark on a piece of wet clay. They desperately needed a way to track this giant economy, and that wet clay tablet was the perfect, practical solution for daily inventory. And this brilliantly illustrates how the physical act of writing actually started to evolve. I mean, our scribe couldn't just stare at thousands of identical lines forever. He needed to know what those tallies actually stood for, right? So he starts drawing a little picture of a grain stalk next to the tally marks. But over generations, scribes got tired of laboriously drawing a perfectly detailed stalk of grain every single time. It was tedious. So they simplified the drawings. They abstracted them. Eventually, they just agreed on a set of quick, simplified symbols to represent all those goods flowing into the holy places. Now, this right here leads us to a monumental mental leap. It's a real game changer. Somebody, eventually, realized that these abstracted symbols didn't just have to represent the physical concept of a thing, they could actually represent the spoken word itself. So, for example, the symbol for a cow wasn't just a quick doodle of an animal in a field anymore, it directly represented the actual spoken word, cow. But, you run into a wall pretty quickly with this. You can't really communicate complex thoughts if your entire vocabulary is just 1,000 or so nouns. Enter a very happy accident of Sumerian linguistics. You see, mostly Sumerian words were just single syllables, and you built larger concepts simply by mashing those short words together. Like if you took their word for sickle and added the word for grain, boom, together they meant harvest. This little linguistic quirk basically unlocked the whole shebang. It's known as the Rebus principle. Because their words were mostly these punchy little monosyllables, it was incredibly easy to transition from seeing a symbol as a physical object to seeing it as just a sound. Take the symbol for a female sheep, right? An ewe. Scribes realized they could look at that sheep drawing and just hear the sound itself. Suddenly, drawing a sheep gives you the phonetic sound to represent the pronoun you, or even the tree yew. Now you're starting to think of those pictures as sounds. That is the magic moment. Once you make that connection, you're totally free. You aren't chained down to drawing a unique, literal picture for every single item in the universe. By just stringing phonetic sounds together, these scribes could suddenly build an infinite variety of complex words completely detached from those original pictures. But just as this incredible language evolution was happening, they hit a snag. A very physical, incredibly annoying problem. Think about this. How did a frustrating smudge on a piece of dirt literally change how we format writing in the West today? Well, it all comes down to the actual physical medium our scribe was using. The glaring problem with wet clay is that it takes absolutely forever to dry. Our ancient scribe is in the temple, right? And he's originally writing his lists from top to bottom. But just imagine the sheer agonizing frustration of working perfectly on this tablet all day, only to accidentally rest your sweaty hand on the clay and completely obliterate a whole column of your hard work. Honestly, it was an absolute nightmare for these guys. So, the crucial point is how they brilliantly adapted to this physical limitation. To stop destroying their own work, the scribes simply decided to start writing from left to right instead. Problem solved, right? The smudging drastically reduced. But there was a catch. The priests and the other readers, they absolutely hated it. They grew up reading top to bottom, and they despised this whole sideways innovation. So the scribes hit on this genius workaround. They just took all the characters and they rotated them 90 degrees. This meant a priest could grab the tablet, turn it sideways, and read it top to bottom, just like they always had. Eventually, of course, people just got used to reading those sideways characters from left to right. But because the characters had been physically flipped on their side, they became even more abstracted. They stopped looking anything like the original pictures of grain or cows. The old pictogram has vanished completely. Instead, they just became these abstract, wedge-shaped impressions, made up of sharp little line strokes from the stylus they were using. Let's move to our next point and see how this builds as it spreads, because this incredible wedge-shaped writing system didn't just stay locked up in Sumer. It was adopted by neighboring cultures like the Akkadians and the Elamites. And they took the system and ran with it, abstracting it even further. They started adding determinatives, basically these little grammatical markers that told you what part of speech something was, just in case the context was a bit ambiguous. And just like that, humanity had a fully robust, grammatically complex writing system on its hands. I mean, just look at this incredible trajectory. We started with some guy making simple accounting tallies for grain inventory and temple records. But with a system this complex, we are way past storage lists. This exact same system gave humanity the power to write things as beautifully abstract, lyrical, and profound as the Epic of Gilgamesh or the great creation myth, the Enuma Elish. We literally went from counting sheep to creating some of the most enduring epic poetry in all of human history. And you know what? We are incredibly lucky to even know this history at all thanks to a deeply ironic twist of fate. Usually, when an ancient city is violently burned to the ground, all of its history is lost forever. But when your entire written record is carved into wet clay, the devastating fires of war don't destroy your history, they act like a giant kiln. The fire actually bakes and hardens the clay, perfectly preserving it. These disastrous fires accidentally created the ultimate historical backup, giving us records that have survived for more than 5,500 years. Now, it's really important to put this into a global perspective for a second. Sumer represents the first place in history where writing saw widespread use. But, as our source notes, writing would later be developed completely independently in Mesoamerica and almost certainly independently in China as well. There is some historical debate regarding the Indus Valley and Egypt, but the source material for this explainer actually leans toward the theory that both of those groups likely inherited the basic concept of writing from Sumer rather than developing it entirely in isolation. Ultimately, the invention of writing in ancient Sumer completely altered the trajectory of human civilization. It solved a hyperlocal inventory problem, but inadvertently handed us the tools to communicate across millennia. But it leaves us with a truly fascinating question to ponder. If we went from tallying grain to writing syllables to composing sweeping epic poetry, how in the world did we eventually make the massive leap to the alphabet, the system that still powers most Western cultures today? Well, that is a wild story for another time. Thanks for learning with us on this explainer, and keep asking questions.